Okay. Mr. Petersen, Senator Petersen, I'll turn this over to you at this point.
Thank you. Yeah, Madam President, I'd like to jump into the cybersecurity, the digital evidence, if I may, if that's okay with you. Mr. Cotton, what so far has been completed for the digital forensics portion of the audit?
So we have completed the forensics acquisition of all of the items that Mr. Bennett just mentioned that were provided to us by the county. And I'd like to take a moment to walk through that process a bit to help everyone understand the forensics fidelity and the standard of care that we took to ensure that there were zero, and I repeat, zero changes to any of the original media or devices.
Okay, go ahead.
So as part of the imaging process, first of all, chain of custody is extremely important, as we previously discussed with the ballots. That standard of care also was transferred into the digital imaging and preservation of that data. So upon receiving each of these digital devices, we filled out an evidence acquisition form that started the initial chain of custody for the acquisition within the digital forensics and analysis piece of this audit. On that form, we carefully recorded all of the serial numbers. We then leveraged what is known in the industry as a write block device. Now, a write block device is used, and as a matter of fact...
How is write spelled?
So write, W-R-I-T.
Right, as in write.
As
okay.
in write.
Okay.
And the sole purpose of this device is to prevent any modification of the original evidence that is plugged into it. Okay. This is accepted within our judicial system as the methodology needed to be utilized for anything to be admitted into court and to maintain that standard of care for the digital forensics chain of custody. As part of that acquisition, we then took a bit-for-bit copy, forensics copy, of each of the digital devices. At the end of that copy, we applied what is known as a MD5, a Machine Digest 5 hash value to that acquisition. Now, when you think about that, it is a digital fingerprint of that evidence that we just acquired. If anyone changes even one bit of data within that evidence file, it will totally invalidate the MD5 and create a totally new signature on that particular piece of evidence. Okay? So for every device that Mr. Bennett mentioned that we imaged, we performed that exact process. We know who imaged it, we know when they imaged it, we know where it was imaged to, and that is a controlled item within our evidence and chain of custody handling procedure. We then took those digital copies and we maintain one of those digital copies as primary evidence. And so we locked that away in a U.S. government GSA approved safe to ensure that no one would access it and that it is there as the primary evidence for the basis of our analysis. We then created examination copies that we have used for the determination of the cybersecurity status and other aspects of those systems. Okay. So I must reiterate, not a single bit of data was ever changed on any device that came into our possession.
So, Madam President, Mr. Cotton, are you saying that the machines were not damaged or tampered with in any way where they couldn't be used again? And if they were, you have implemented the people could check and see whether that was done.
Senator, that is correct. So we have exactly a bit-for-bit image of these systems as we received them, okay? We did not modify, we did not change any chips, we did not access any anything other than the hard drives for those systems. So if there were any changes to the original equipment, those had to have occurred within the custody of the Maricopa County Board of Supervisors, not with the custody of the auditors.
Okay.
Mr. Petersen, Senator Petersen, may I ask a question?
Yeah, of course.
Mr. Cotton, well, we're trying to keep this official. Mr. Cotton, recently in the news, I don't know if you have heard or not, but our Secretary of State, Katie Hobbs, made a statement a few weeks ago that she would not allow these machines to be used again because she could not verify that we had not, you, not us, you had tampered with them. I don't understand that statement because it is my understanding that when election machines, no matter whose machines they are, that election machines are supposed to be calibrated and certified before any election goes on to make sure that those machines haven't been tampered with, that they are calibrated correctly, and I believe they do that also after an election. So I have this question I don't understand. How can the Secretary of State say that she can't certify the machines weren't tampered with when supposedly we have certified people that come in to certify machines aren't tampered with? It doesn't make sense. Could you explain that to me, please?
Madam President, I certainly understand your confusion, and I share that with you. I'd like to also reiterate that as part of our evidence handling procedure, we had cameras watching over our evidence storage facilities and our acquisition and replication procedures 24/7, okay? So any form of tampering certainly would have been caught on video. However, we did not do anything of the sort that would have interfered with any of the machine configurations or any of the alleged tampering that the Secretary of State has alleged.
Well, Madam President, if I may, just this is more of just, I think, a comment or a statement along with your concern here. And I think this could be something we need to look at legislatively. If we have a process, and from what I've heard, it's about $8,000. You know, the county did an audit for $8,000 or $20,000, whatever it was, to certify and make sure the machines were not tampered with. And this is also part of a process before an election. If that process doesn't work, then, and we're saying that is not valid because somebody doing an audit ruins that and you can't recertify it. It sounds like that we need to have something else. There needs to be another process that works, that you truly, maybe it's the truly certification and verification that machines have not been tampered with process. I don't know what it's called, but anyways, I share your concern. I think that's a good bullet point for us to be looking at for future legislation.
If I also might add, Madam President, that position that they must replace all of the voting equipment is at odds with the public statements that were made by the Maricopa County officials following the two independent audits that they conducted early in this year. Right. So,
And those statements would be what?
those statements would be that they were able to go in and validate that no firmware had been changed, that there was no changes to those systems, and that the election was, in their phraseology, legitimate.
Okay. So, Madam President, if I may just continue on with some of the digital forensics questions here. Can you continue to just tell us with what you've received, what have you received, and what has been done with what you've received so far?
So, Mr. Bennett went through the list of devices that we have received. I would add to that list that he
Could you just repeat it real quick, just so we
Sure.
kind of
So we have-
compartmentalize it with the digital forensics?
We have received 385 tabulators.
Okay.
Okay, those are the Dominion ICP2s. We have received the county EMS server. EMS, once again, is the election management system. We received their server. We received physical devices correlating to the EMS workstation function, to the adjudication function. We have received 11 hard drives that contained Of interesting note, however, is on those 11 hard drives which contain cloned data, they did not use a forensically secure process to image those original systems. So the dates and times on those cloned systems were altered by their cloning process. So just as an FYI. With all of the digital devices that we have received, whether in physical or digital form, we have created a forensic copy of each one of those devices as prescribed in the procedures that I just outlined to you. Okay. We have taken those digital forensics copies and we have conducted keyword searching across them, looking for internet connections, looking for anomalous or unauthorized connections into the system. We have conducted searches looking for malware on those systems. We have also created virtual systems of those forensics images to conduct live memory analysis on those virtual systems. And that's where we are today.
So what have we not received from the county that we were supposed to get to be able to do the forensic analysis of?
I think if I'm going to put these in order of criticality, we have not received the router configuration files. We have not received the router data. And Mr. Bennett and myself were in multiple conversations with county officials in which they had agreed to provide that information to us. We had actually entered into a compromise with the county in which they would provide us with virtual access to that data, in addition to providing us with Splunk NetFlow data with a time period of approximately 90 days prior to the election and 60 days after the election. And we had agreed to that. We have not received that due to a response from the county in May stating that they would not provide that because the data would compromise law enforcement operations and would also potentially compromise PII information of Maricopa County residents that had not already been turned over as part of the audit request.
Okay, now tell us the significance of us not, why do you need to look at the routers and the router data and the Splunk logs that they originally told us they were going to give us, and now they have, they're not going to provide that, or they're saying they won't provide that. What's the significance? Why do we need to look at that?
Well, it's critically important to substantiate some findings that we are seeing through the keyword searching and the processes I already mentioned. There are a number of things that we know as a matter of fact have occurred that we need to further take that information and validate that information. So, for example, we know through public record, public statements, that an element of the election system was actually compromised or breached during the course of the November 2020 election. It is a matter of public statement by Maricopa County as well as legal action and law enforcement action surrounding that particular incident. The registration server that was public facing did have unauthorized access to that. In cybersecurity terms, it was breached. We know that the county has accepted that as an unauthorized breach because they actually issued a letter to a small subset of the voters who were affected by that breach, and they issued that in January of 2021. In that letter, they did acknowledge that there was unauthorized access in November to that server. Okay, so that's one item. The second item is it has become readily apparent in the course of our analysis that there are severe cybersecurity problems with the way the election management system and network was maintained. Okay. For example,
if you can give
yeah,
some
for
examples
example,
of that.
if you walk into an average home computer, you will find that the antivirus definitions that protect that system from malware have been updated within the last week. You will find that there have been system security patches sent by Microsoft or by Apple, typically within the last week. Microsoft does it weekly. And you would find that that system is patched and the antivirus definitions are up to date. Sadly, that is not the case for any of the endpoints that we have looked at inside of the Maricopa County election management system. Okay? The last time that the antivirus was updated on these systems was the date that the Dominion software was installed on the systems. That happens to be August of 2019. Okay. There have been no operating system updates or patches on this system since that same date. What that creates is a tremendous vulnerability to anyone who could get access through a system such as if, for example, the registration server was serving as a jump box. In other words, it was dual network so that it was public facing and also private facing into the election system. If someone accessed that system, they would have no difficulty at all effectively penetrating and gaining system level access at the current patch state and antivirus state of these systems.
So, Madam President, Mr. Cotton, if they could have if they were able to get access, how long would it take somebody to hack in or whatever if they're...
The vulnerabilities that exist on these systems would take an average script kiddie less than 10 minutes to get access to these systems.
Okay, so this is high vulnerability situations.
Correct.
So we need to get the routers. It's clear we need to get the routers. We need, even if it's just a report, they can scan it, they can look at it, they can do whatever they need to do to make it safe. We just need to see the traffic during this election or during this period that you're looking for. Now, they brought up security concerns. Are these, do you believe these are valid concerns that they brought up from sharing the router traffic or router reports with us, anything from the router? Are these valid security concerns from your point of view?
They're not. And let me explain why. So when you think about a router, think about someone delivering the mail to your mailbox, okay? That router is simply the mail carrier, okay? On a standard envelope that you might mail to your mother, you're going to put your return address, you're going to put the address that it's going to, and then you put that in the mailbox. The mail carrier looks at that, it knows they know where to route that, and they will simply route that letter so it's delivered in the mailbox of your mother. With a router, it's very similar. For each packet of data that you have an address to where it's going to, you have an address of where it came from, so that any response can come right back to that system. But what you don't have is the actual content or the letter that's contained in the envelope within the router itself.
Okay, so just to that point, you won't see social security numbers or driver's licenses or people-sensitive data on this.
You will not.
Okay.
To that point, Senator Petersen? Yes. So when we're talking about the addresses, is this what is known as the IP addresses? Am I on the right track on this?
Yes, ma'am. So it's actually a combination of two elements. One is the IP address, which everyone's very familiar with. But typically on the return side, you will also have what's known as a MAC address. And that is a unique identifier for the communicating device that actually sent the packet. Okay, so for example, if you've got a wireless phone, your wireless modem has a unique MAC address, so that if you're behind a home router or something like that, it will know where to deliver that return packet to.
Okay. One of my concerns, I'm sorry.
Oh, go ahead.
Please. When we received the letter from Sheriff Pinzone stating that we would not get the routers because of a potential security issue, the one thing that stuck in my mind, I just heard you say that there is not a valid security concern there, but just hypothetically, if for some reason they think that there's a security concern, my question is why would they be using the same router as our election systems, as if there's even a small remote possibility that they think that somebody could be jeopardized? Why are we sharing routers with other agencies? Why don't they have their own personal secure router?
Ma'am, I can't answer why they shared that space, but once again, this is one of those situations where what they've told the public is drastically different than the apparent reality in response to a legal subpoena. Okay, so from a public response standpoint, Maricopa County officials have repeatedly stated that the election system was a closed system. It did not touch the internet, and therefore, it could not have commingled with the data from the Sheriff's Department or the Maricopa County other office space. The fact that they have responded back to an official subpoena with the justification that to produce that data would compromise these other aspects of the Maricopa County network that does touch the internet is an admission that maybe things aren't like what they've told the American public.
So, Mr. Cotton, we've talked about the routers, Splunk logs. Again, why do we need the Splunk logs? And I also want to ask about that. We also, you mentioned, have not received the passwords, the tokens. Why do we need those things?
So if I can address the first part of that question, Senator Petersen. So part of the challenge that we have is that specifically, I'll use the EMS server as an example. The Windows security log, or the Windows security event log, as some people would call that, actually only goes back to the 5th of February of 2021. Now, there are a couple of things.
So after the election.
After the election.
Okay.
So we would need this data to cover and to help fill in the blanks back to the election. Okay. But more importantly, there's an aspect to that security log that bears consideration. And so the security log was set to retain approximately 20 megabytes of data. And the way that works is it operates on a first in, first out principle. As soon as you hit 20 megabytes of data, the oldest entry gets deleted, and the next, and so it just continually rolls like that to maintain the constraints on that data space. When we took a look at this, we found specifically in March, and I believe it was March 11th, there were 37,646 queries for a blank password on a system that only contained 8 accounts. Now, given the short time period that happened, that clearly was a script that was executed by the user EMS admin. Okay. What we don't have, because of the lack of logs and the condition of that system, is where did that script come from? Okay. So by leveraging the router information and by leveraging the Splunk information, I should be able to determine who was using the EMS admin account at that particular time and where did that originate from.
So just to be clear on this, were there 37,000 logins on one day? Is that what you're saying? How would you identify this?
When you're doing a security check on a system, it's very common for you to look for passwords that have a null password or a blank password, right? And so you can query the device itself to let you know whether or not there are any accounts that have a blank password on them.
So it's a query? I'm just looking for what you're calling this.
It's a script, it's a query.
So there's 37,000 queries.
Yes.
And they were done on this one day. And the reason we need the Splunk logs is because those 37,000 queries churned the data so that you can only look back to February 5th, or what was the date?
February 5th.
February 5th.
That is correct.
And obviously, we need to go back to the election.
Right.
We need to be looking at the election day, prior to the election day, looking at access. So we don't have that, what we were given, we don't have that that window, which is the critical window we need to look at.
That is correct.
Okay. So obviously we need the routers, or just the data, and or how about we just start with March 11th, the 37,000 queries? I mean, give us something here. What about the machines, the Dominion machines, the tokens for the machines? Why do we need those?
Okay. So within the administrative functions of the Dominion ICPs, you have basically a couple of different levels or roles, as they call them, inside of the EMS software. The current state, so we have completely recreated a virtual EMS. I am able to burn these little fobs or iButton keys, as they really are, and those give me security access at whatever role I'm permitted to burn inside of the EMS. Currently, inside of the EMS construct, there is only one role, and that is of poll worker. Within the Dominion ICPs, poll workers as a role, even if you give them admin access, do not get access to the configuration of that device itself. So on each of these ICPs, and these are ICP2s, we know that there are 2 NIC cards. We know that they can be configured with wireless modems. We know that they can be configured with cellular modems. So the purpose of requiring this information is to get a configuration for each of those systems that shows how they were configured, what is enabled, what is not enabled, and more importantly, I can get the MAC addresses for each of those devices. Now, if you recall our previous conversation on the router data, where you have an IP address, you have a MAC address, it then becomes a very simple process to say, did any of these MAC addresses ever touch the internet? It's very simple.
So it sounds like Maricopa County does not have access to this. Dominion only has access to this. Why is it important for Maricopa County to be able to have access to this?
Well, your assumption appears to be true. So when we asked them for the administration level fobs, we received a response back within the same letter as the router data, saying that they had provided us everything that they have access to, and the inference obviously there is that only the contract Dominion employees contracted by Maricopa County have access to configure those ICPs and to get access to the configuration or technician aspects of those ICPs. Now, where this becomes important is that if you as a county cannot validate the configuration independently of the vendor, then how do you ever validate an election system that it's safe to vote? Okay? Because you don't know. As a county, it's responsible to validate and certify those systems prior to a vote. Okay? So I would suggest that at this point, based on the evidence that has been provided to me, that the Maricopa County officials do not have the ability to independently verify the configurations of their systems without using Dominion employees.
So, Madam President, so again, I think this is just kind of another bullet point for us, something for future legislation. We always want to make sure, I think, that, and if this is the case, this is just with what we've been able to see so far, perhaps, and we'd love to hear from the county on whether they can. If they do have access, then great. If the county can get this administrative access where they can, look at the tabulators, we want to make sure that the state, the county, can always be at a higher level of administration than these third parties that we're using, so that it's us doing the elections, it's the county doing the elections. So this, I think, is another thing that we need to make sure that we address. Either now we need to get a response of that they do have access to this and they can audit this themselves and control this, or this is something that we need to make sure in the future that we are able to do.
Question? And I don't know that you have an answer, but I'm going to throw it out and maybe we can put it on our list of questions to ask. Originally, the Board of Supervisors had agreed to do a forensic audit with us, which is what we wanted. We did not want the ballots moved. We would not want the machines moved. And that's the path I thought we were going on until they went into an executive session and said they were going to do their own audits using two companies that are authorized to certify the machines. And so they did these two audits. One was Pro BMV, one was SLI, thank you. Those two. If they had done the audit, as Senator Petersen said, why did they not come up with this information and report it as well? I don't know that you'd have an answer. It's
probably can't speak for
I can't speak to what their scoping was. I would suspect that a full cybersecurity audit was not part of their scoping. That's what I would surmise. But the reports that were produced by both of those audit firms clearly did not address the cybersecurity aspects that we have found. And there's another finding that you would think that any audit firm would be looking at, and that is commonality of passwords. So what we have found is that for all the administrative accounts, no matter what the name of that account was, they shared the same password. Okay? Now, that password appears to have been established at the same time that the Dominion software was installed on these systems, which August of 2019, and does not appear to have been changed during that entire time period. Okay. So once again,
And so to that point, what would be the what would be the recommendations with, what's the industry standard with passwords and recommendations with password, best practices with that?
well, first and foremost, the shared password eliminates one of the very critical items of cybersecurity, and that is we cannot attribute the actions of a given username back to an individual. Because these were all shared passwords, literally anyone who had any access to any admin account could have been able to use any other admin account. So accountability is out the window, right, from an individual aspect. From a cybersecurity standpoint, it is
Now, just to be clear, when we're talking about these passwords, these are the passwords for the server. This is not the machine admin password you're talking. Which passwords are you talking about here?
We're talking about the EMS admin password. We're talking about the adjudication admin password.
So this is not the Dominion machine, the
Operating system password.
This is the EMS, meaning the election servers, not the
So-
Dominion tabulators or machine.
There is a correlation between the Dominion Windows accounts and the Dominion functions. So you can't separate the two. In other words, when you log into the EMS server, for example, you will enter in the EMS admin username, and then you'll enter in a password. Okay, that provides you single sign-on access into all of the functions of the EMS software. So these two things are tied together.
Right, but what I'm trying to make sure that's clear for people to understand is that you do have the admin password for the server, correct?
Correct.
But you don't have the admin password for the tokens for the Dominion
Well,
machines.
A little bit of a correction there. I do have the admin passwords. What I don't have is the authentication fob because it requires both of those items.
Right.
So we were able to recover the admin passwords used for the tabulators, but because we don't have the ability to burn that I-button fob.
It's like an additional layer of
Correct.
security.
It's a multi-factor
for
authentication
those.
into the tabulator.
And it appears that only Dominion has that.
Correct.
From what we know so far.
Correct.
From the information we have so far. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you, Madam
Right,
President.
anything else that you wanted to add that's not covered at this point?
I think that there is one other critical aspect of why I need the Splunk logs. So anonymous logins are a normal part of Windows activity. So if you've ever accessed a shared file in Windows, that's called an SMB share. And as part of that request, there will be an anonymous logon action to the server that has the share file on it. And then that is followed immediately by the authentication of the user that is requesting that access. As part of that, the course of that normal anonymous action, the Windows logs will actually record the username that is requesting that action. It will record the IP address that is originating the request, and it will record the host name of that originating client. What we are seeing here, and what does require additional correlation with NetFlow data, is we're seeing anonymous logins at the system level that do not follow that pattern of normal Windows behavior. Okay, and so we need to have that additional data to validate what that activity is.
Thank you. All right, ready to move on to the next section? Sorry, this is tedious, but there's a lot of information that we're trying to absorb and understand here, so bear with us, please. I'm going to go back to Mr. Logan at this part. Mr. Logan, we would like you to help us address the issues that you're having with the hand counting of ballots, the paper examination, and then we'll move into voter data analysis and envelopes. So let's start with the hand count of ballots and where we're at on that.
So there's been a lot of questions, I know, about the timeline and why some things have taken a little bit longer than expected. I have to say that every audit I've ever been a part of, usually whatever the organization is that you're working with, is available to answer questions or run ideas by and to get some feedback on findings. And that's one of the more difficult things with this audit is to not have that feedback loop and not be able to ask questions on things that could be solved very quickly.
From Maricopa County.
Correct, from Maricopa County. Specifically, we've run into with, I think Ken Bennett was stating earlier about some of the duplicated ballots. Specifically, we've had a lot of problems with the way that those were recorded and the way they were received over. I think probably the best way to do this is to go over, I think it's actually Exhibit B, if you can put that up on the screen. Actually, can you zoom in so people can see that a little better? Okay. So what we have here on the top of the screen is the original manifest on one of the boxes that held duplicate stuff in it. You can see all the numbers, the MC 17416 and so forth. So that was what was stated was given to us. If you take a look at the table below it, and actually if you can just zoom in a little more maybe to make it a little more clear.